Velkommen til Palestinapodden. Vi har hatt 2 ganske hektiske uker, så det kommer litt sent denne episoden her. Vi skal snakke med Rob Lipton fra Jewish Voice for Peace, som var på Visit Vestbredden-festivalen, som var 11. mai. Som vi 2 var og jobbet med og arrangerte sammen med Palestinakomiteen i Oslo.
Yep.
Det ble jo en fin dag.
Ja, det ble det. Og Rob var jo med i panelsamtalen og holdt en veldig fin appell. Så det blir interessant å snakke med han mer om Jewish Voice for Peace og arbeidet de gjør, og ikke minst hans perspektiv på politikken i USA. Det får vi god innsikt i.
Ja. Han hadde jo, ja, som du sa, en panelsamtale på Visit Vestbredden, som vi forhåpentligvis kommer til å ha en liten bonus av her også, hvis du gikk glipp av den på Visit Vestbredden. Det var jo stappa den salen som hadde den samtalen, så det er veldig bra. Visit Vestbredden, veldig masse folk som kom, herregud, strålende vær. Tusen takk til alle som kom og viste sin støtte. Det er, som vi har snakket litt om før, det er jo en slags blandet følelse av å gå inn i en sånn dag, fordi det er en festival hvor vi skal feire palestinsk kultur og tradisjon. Men samtidig så vet man jo det som skjer i Gaza akkurat nå, er helt forferdelig. Men det var fint å kunne være med folk, og at alle var der for samme grunn. Og at det ikke minst markerer Nakba, katastrofen som skjedde 76 år siden, da 750 000 palestinere ble fordrevet ut av sine hjem. Og det er jo hele poenget med den markeringen, er liksom at vi har jo blitt etnisk renset siden 1948, men vi som er igjen, vi skal så best mulig vi kan prøve å opprettholde og vise fram vår kultur, sånn at vi ikke dør ut, holdt jeg på å si, og at folk skal huske at vi er et folk som har masse rike tradisjoner og god mat, og at vi fortsatt er et folk som eksisterer. Så det var en kjempedemo midt på dagen også, den hørte jeg var veldig sterk. Det var jo 6-7 tusen i toget. På et eller annet tidspunkt var det 3 minutter stillhet gjennom hele Oslo, som var utrolig fint.
Veldig sterkt. Og aksjonsgruppa gikk forrest og var på flukt. Og så hadde vi en god rekke med masse fine tåber som gikk også, som var veldig sterkt, og spesielt med de 3 minutterne da. Det var mange som ble emosjonelle der, blant annet Ingvild bak kamera også, og jeg ble det selv, så det var veldig, veldig fint. Det var en bra dag. Selvfølgelig kjempevanskelig å sette tonen nå med alt som skjer, og så håper vi at neste år så kan vi ha en lettere stemning.
Frigjøringsfestival.
Frigjøringsfestival hadde vært magisk.
Jeg tenker før vi snakker med Rob, så bare drar vi gjennom noen ting som har skjedd, som er litt sånn uunngåelig å ikke snakke om. Ja. Vi var jo i forrige episode, før Lars, så var vi på UiO og snakket med noen av studentene der. De er der fortsatt, så hvis du vil gå og besøke de og gi de litt støtte, så er det kjempefint. Det er flere universiteter som har begynt å campe.
Når vi spilte inn episoden, så var det jo bare dem. Nå er det hvor mange?
Trondheim, Bergen, Kio, Ås.
Tromsø? Nei.
Drammen. Snart Tromsø. Vi heier på dere. Det er helt fantastisk at det skjer. Nå har jo UiO bestemt for at de ikke vil gå for akademisk boykott. Det var 6 som stemte mot akademisk boykott, og 5 som stemte for. Helt dustete å gjøre det. I hvert fall når i dag så kom det en arrestordre mot Benjamin Netanyahu, Yoav Gallant, som er forsvarsminister, som ICC ba om I dag, som en veldig god nyhet.
Det jo som palestinere da, jeg blir redd for å håpe med en gang, fordi det her har vi ikke sett før. Altså hele den bevegelsen her har vi ikke sett før. Nei. Så det blir jo veldig spennende å se, og det mange potensielle teorier her. Vi snakket litt om det med Rob også, at det kan også være en bevegelse for å dempe alt støy rundt med alle andre involverte land, og på en måte feste det på et par personer, som man kan gå videre. En oppfordring jeg vil komme med en gang da, at hvis ICC henter inn Netanyahu nå, og Galant, så må vi ikke stoppe. For det så sykt flere folk som involvert I der, og det har pågått I 76 år, at man da setter ned tempo hvis 2 stykker blir tatt. Ja. Det tapt I mine øyne. Fordi det her handler om generasjonene før meg og deg, og hele den rekka. Så det her skal være den lille sprekken I demningen som får hele det korthuset til å falle. Absolutt. Og det må vi pushe for. Ja. Og det ikke menneskene, ikke sant? Det en ideologi her som må bli tatt ned. Det sionismen. Men det en veldig god start. Ekstremt god start. Å begynne med verstingen og Galant, og så må vi ta litt sånn Itamar Ben-Gvir og Benny Gantz og litt andre folk også som burde... Og amerikanske politikere. Og ikke glem Norge. Vi også med på det. Absolutt, ja. Det som har skjedd I Israel de siste ukene nå også, at det har vært masse demonstrasjoner utenfor, både I Tel Aviv og utenfor huset til Netanyahu, om at han må gå av. Benny Gantz nå, altså det veldig mye trøkk på Netanyahu fra alle forskjellige hold, som dritbra, fordi nå har Benny Gantz, han som herregud, hva heter det for noe? Han krigsminister, holdt jeg på å si. Ja, forsvarsminister. Han ikke forsvarsminister, men han liksom en stor del av krigføringen. Ja. Han har gitt Netanyahu et mål om innen 8. juni, så må Netanyahu kommet med en plan for hvem som skal styre Gaza. Og hvis de ikke gjør det, så kommer han til å trekke seg, og da faller brikkene I regjeringen. Eller ikke brikkene, men da faller hele regjeringen hans, tror jeg. For når en begynner å trekke seg, da begynner alle andre å trekke seg. Mens Itamar Ben-Gvir også legger masse press på å bare utslette hele Gaza, bygge settlements, og man har sett planer for det nå. Så han føler både press fra folket I sin egen regjering. Israelere har begynt å gå mot hverandre. Jeg så en video I går av Ben-Gvir, som det var noen bosettere som hadde ropt mot han eller noe sånt nå, eller det hadde vært noen clashes, som man liker å kalle det så mykt. Og da hadde han trukket ut pistolen sin og begynt å aime på dem mot sine egne folk. Så man ser liksom at det begynner å smuldre opp innvendig også. Ja. Og nå som den arrestordenen har gått ut også, det et kjempesignal for de andre politikerne som har vært med Netanyahu hele veien. Vi kommer til å se folk trekke seg ut der også nå, fordi at de redd for arrestordre på seg selv, selvfølgelig. Så jeg prøver å se på dette som positivt. Jeg skal ikke håpe alt for mye, men jeg sa til Ingvild I stad at hvis man ser Netanyahu I fengsel, så blir det kanskje en liten fest. Ja, I hvert fall en god matbit. En god matbit, ja. Bra, og bare fortsette å legge trykk på det med studentencampens. Altså, det noe av det viktigste man gjør nå. Så hvis det andre skoler som sitter og vurderer og planlegger et eller annet, begynn å reach ut til de andre, og fortsette det presset. Det kommer til å vippe I valget I USA. Det kommer til å påvirke historisk sett, når vi ser tilbake på det her, I så stor grad, at det blir en historisk markering I bøkene. Det jeg helt sikker på. Vi kan jo bare gå litt inn på det som skjer I Rafah akkurat nå. For der de har begynt med bakkeinvasjonene I Rafah. Det
800 000 som har flyktet fra Rafah og oppover i Gazastripen de 2 siste ukene, som en helt insane mengde med folk. Jeg så et bilde der hvor man viste alle teltene 4. mai, og så ser man et nytt bilde 15. mai, og der var det alle teltene borte. De har ingen sted å gå. Det blir drept mellom 50 og 100 palestinere hver dag fortsatt i Gaza. Og det sikkert bare et underslag av de tallene. Og så har det jo vært disse ekstremistene utenfor grensa som har stått og ødelagt nødhjelp, som har kastet nødhjelp, ødelagt det sånn at det ikke kommer inn. De fleste grensene nå stengt. Uten at politiet stopper dem heller, disse kolonialistene som gjør det her, at det rettferdiggjøres. Så situasjonen jo fortsatt like ille, og det blir bare verre og verre. Så fortsett å følge med på det som skjer i Rafah. Ja, og ikke slutte å snakke om det.
Bra. Du var med på en kampanje utenfor Nasjonalmuseet?
Ja, det var jeg. Det var en kjempefin aksjon som Nasjonalmuseet har jo sagt at de skal representere kunst som speiler det samfunnet vi i nå. Og for de som kanskje har fulgt med litt på sosiale medier og sånn, så det en Instagram som heter Kultur mot folkemord, som har belyst om at det finnes en tåb på Nasjonalmuseet som de fikk i gave, som ikke blir utstilt. Og de ønsker ikke å utstille det, og når de har fått flere spørsmål om det, så vil de fortsatt ikke gjøre det, lettere sagt. Så da bestemte vi oss for å utstille de tåbene vi har. Så da, på lørdag, det var veldig fint, på lørdag så kom det alle som har en tåb skulle ha på seg en tåb, og alle andre som ikke hadde en tåb skulle ha på seg bunad eller noe fint. Og da lagde man en slags sånn beskyttelsessirkel for alle de som har tåb, så det gikk vi liksom i en rad og rekke. Jeg tror vi var 200 stykker eller noe sånt. Og da var de med tåb i den innerste sirkelen, og så var det en sirkel til rundt, og så enda en sirkel. Og så spilte vi en sang som het Salut for Gaza, da vi gikk inn. Og så sang blandakor for våpenhvile til ungdommen.
Magisk.
Og så gikk vi bare ut.
Det så helt sinnssykt fint ut.
Det var utrolig fint, og det en av de fineste aksjonene jeg har vært med på.
Fantastisk. Palkveld?
Palkveld, ja.
25.
Nei, 30.
Nei, 30.
Torsdag 30. april, så det palkveld.
Bra.
Det her jo de som bor i Oslo. Så, hvis du bor utenfor Oslo, så du hjertelig velkommen til å komme til palkveld. Men vi skal ha en palkveld om basic Palestina. Palestina ikke så basic, men vi skal rett og slett ha en sånn slags Q&A, hvor vi har noen Palestina-eksperter på scenen. Eller folk som kan I hvert fall veldig mye om Palestina på scenen. Og så kan man rett og slett spørre spørsmål om Palestina, sånn at man får vite litt om historien og kanskje ting man har alltid lurt på, men ikke helt finner informasjon på og sånn. Så det skjer den 30.
Bra. En siste liten rant. Nå vi 7 måneder inn I det her. Snart 8. Vi har sett alt live. Det ingen unnskyldninger igjen for å ikke være aktivist nå. Hvis du bryr deg om menneskeheten på et helt generelt nivå, nå må alle steppe opp, og nå det en del ting som skjer på sosiale medier I forhold til liksom boykotter og blokkeringer og de tingene der. Jeg mener helt seriøst, hvis du som influencer nå mottar penger fra noen som bygger fabrikker på israelske bosetterområder, eller noe som støtter finansielt til det som foregår I Gaza, du burde seriøst bli cancelet på dagen, og du burde ta deg sammen. Du burde seriøst ta deg sammen hvis du mottar de blodpengene. Og til de som begynner å bli nummende, for det kjenner jeg veldig på nå, Vi må ikke stoppe å kjempe. Vi må holde trykket, og vi må steppe opp enda mer faktisk, fordi nå vi nære noen breaking point som har vært snakk om lenge med for eksempel akademisk boykott, med arrestordren som skjer nå. Altså nå vi nærmere enn vi noen gang har vært. Og når jeg tok T-banen hit i dag, så ser jeg noen som sitter og spiser Mackeren, og det sånn, det så enkle ting vi kan ta tak i. Det pågår et folkemord, og fordi du har lyst på pommes frites og en cola, liksom, altså våkne opp. Nå må vi ta det neste steget med total boykott. Influensere som tjener penger på det her må våkne opp. Det ingen unnskyldning. All informasjonen der ute. Og vi har snakket om det før. Hva passende reaksjon på det som skjer nå? Nå det passende reaksjon å være forbannet og si ifra og heve stemmen. Vi må gjøre det nå. For nå vi nærmere enn noen gang. Jeg har aldri hatt den følelsen her før. At vi så nære nå. Nå det siste steget. Så det en demo, det noe du kan gjøre, bare gjør det. Vær så snill.
Og hvis du ikke vet hva du skal gjøre, spør.
100%.
Ja.
Men drit i den pommes frites og den colaen. Det trenger du ikke å spørre om en gang.
Nei. Det finnes mange andre steder som har mye bedre pommes frites. Det har vi snakket om før.
Ja. Det en kombo mellom håp og aggresjon jeg aldri har kjent på.
Ja, men jeg skjønner det, for jeg føler det samme. Jeg føler at det eneste som vil gi en påvirkning akkurat nå, jo selvsagt, altså fellesskapet gjør noe for meg, men boykott det jeg kan gjøre som har en direkte effekt. Hvis vi mange nok som boykotter, så vil det skje en forandring.
Ja.
Så jeg helt enig, jeg blir rasende når jeg ser noen drikke en cola. For en Coca-Cola, du kan drikke en RC-Cola liksom, eller Palestine drink eller whatever, men drikker du noe fra Coca-Cola-company når du vet hva de står for, ja, da koker det inni meg. Men nå skal vi snakke med Rob.
Bra.
Så kos dere, og fritt Palestina.
Fritt Palestina.
Rob, thank you so much for being here.
Yes, thank you.
Tell us a bit about yourself before we start.
Yeah, hi. First, I should tell you about my Norway experience. Why am I even here? I was a professor up in Tromsø for 4 years or so in the 90s. And I was teaching and doing research in public health and teaching in philosophy of science. And since when I actually got pretty good at Norwegian, and I've been keeping up with at least reading and everything over the years, but I've been also keeping up very close relationships with very good friends here. So I always come back. And then also research. I work with sometimes people in the Folkehelse. And so that's one of the reasons I was here this time. I was planning to come anyways. And Kristen, the Vestbredden people, invited me to speak. So that's why I came, and this time. My general history, my day job is epidemiology. I do research and policy work and write grants and that. I've been doing that for a long time. Ironically or coincidentally, on the predictors of violence and in terms of place and people. And then I also, other half of me, I'm like split down the middle as I'm a poet. And I, write, typically, a lot of us are, we write books, very thin books that no one reads. But we have our own little community. And I was the poet laureate for my city, Richmond, California, to develop, and that was in order to develop literature programs for the city with the regular arts, programs there. And so that's what I'm doing now. And I've also, that's my background. I'm Jewish. My parents on my dad's side, Ashkenazi. My mom's a mix of Ashkenazi and Sephardic.
Do you want to just explain the differences?
Yes. The Ashkenazi are Eastern European, Western Russian. That's the ancestry typically. And that's where that's where effectively the people promoting Zionism early from the Jewish side. And then the Sephardic are originally Spanish Jews, and they were typically exiled 1492. And some of those came to the US in a really weird way. They've been there for hundreds of years. And there's an occult, mysterious group of Catholics, for example, in New Mexico, who they didn't even know why, Jewish religious things. It was just, they thought that was part of their religion, but it was from the fact that they originally came over 500 years ago. And my mom's part of the family, she's Ashkenazi too, was apparently in the New Orleans area. But I can't confirm that, that's what they say. So the Mizrahi Jews are the Arabic Jews. And they can be from all parts of the Middle East. Typically they're Arab speaking, that's their language at home. That's a whole nother weird thing to talk about. I mean, because we can do that later. Let's see, that's kind of the background. That's my background, and just in terms of why if it's appropriate to talk about how I got involved with these kinds of issues and where I came from.
Yeah.
For sure.
So I was a standard suburb Jewish kid. I was the firstborn. There's 4 of us. And so of course I went to Hebrew school and played baseball. Hebrew school, had a bar mitzvah, and all of that. And during all of that time, there was not one word spoken about Palestinians or Palestine. We talked about a land without a people for a people without a land. And we didn't know, so that's what I knew, right? And I'm old enough to vaguely remember the 67 war, and the 73 war I definitely remembered, because all the gas, it caused a huge oil shock because there was a Middle East embargo, and that caused a huge problem. But that's something we could talk about now. Nevertheless, the US still sent weapons and support to Israel during the 73 war. Does that remind you of anything? So it was that long ago, what is that, 50 years ago, that a similar kind of situation arose. And then the US did put demands on Israel how far they could go, because they did a counterattack, and they were pushing towards Egypt, which I don't know what they would have done there. And at that point, the US said, yeah, no more. And Israel heard that. So 73 got my attention, like, what's wrong with those Egyptians? Why do they hate Israel so much? Right, that kind of thing. We're in trouble, this little Israel. That's our propaganda. Jonathan Shapira also came out of that. And, so as I got into college, 1982, Lebanon. And then that really was the thing that caught my attention. It was Sabra and Shatila. So I was in my early 20s, and I started to try and ask questions and look in the libraries pre-internet. For example, 1967 war. There was virtually nothing in English as a history. There were records, UN records, and things like that, but there wasn't in English. I'm sure there was in Arabic, and at the point in time, there wasn't really much in Hebrew, as far as I know. I don't speak Hebrew, really. Whatever bar mitzvah stuff I still remember, and although Arabic is a lovely language, I don't know it, so I can't tell you. But I go, wait a minute, there's clearly people there that are Palestinian, and then we were always told they left on their own, during the Nakba. They were maybe encouraged to leave just a little, okay? So, but I couldn't find that, so I had the full head of propaganda. And then I also had this head full of, I'm a pretty hard lefty already. There's lots of other stuff we were working on, and apartheid, and there was Nicaragua at the time. They went through the revolution and that kind of era. And I was also in the Philippines. I was doing research there in the early 80s, and I knew the movement there. That was the U.S.'s first war of freedom. They killed, apparently, we don't know exactly, but now it's been up estimated to about 1 million Filipinos. And so that's the kind of environment I was in. And then right at that same time in 1985 or so, mid-80s, the new historians in Israel started producing their work, because Israel had some kind of, there was like 20 years after the Nakba, then they would release government files and everything. So these new historians, Ilan Pape, Benny Morris, and, for example, Avi Shlaim, were writing these great things about it. And obviously Edward Said was in the picture, and others. Again, I don't speak Arabic, so it was only what I had access to. And then I started to get very interested in this. And I think we need to the extent we can, try to constantly check in with ourselves, question ourselves about what we're trying to do. So that, it got me extremely angry that I had been so brainwashed. And I'd already known about what's going on with the US anyways. I'd already been in, I should have said I think around 20 years old, I was in Taiwan working, but then I went to work in the medical center at one of the refugee camps in Thailand for about 3 months or so. And it was horrible. And that was a war situation. And so, yeah. So I was coming out of that, knowing all this stuff about all sorts of freedom movements and colonization throughout the world. And then I'm like in 82, and so my anger in 85 was, man, something really bad is going on here. I still, we're all Zionists. We called ourselves Zionists because that's what we had no way to separate ourselves out. Right?
And this is what you were taught in Hebrew school, or
Oh,
where?
yeah. Oh my gosh, sure. And we're supposed to just marry Jews, and you're supposed to go fight with the IDF. And that's stuff, 12, 13 years old, and you're getting this. And people might have different experiences, but this used me as an average, because it's just a normal temple, synagogue, and I was in San Diego, normal-ish place. Okay. So then after Sabra and Shatila and the new historians, I started to get more active at that point. And I was with left groups that weren't necessarily Jewish. In fact, I didn't want them to be Jewish, because I was starting to think, what is the Zionism stuff is off. I didn't know what kind of off, but I just thought I feel much more comfortable in a general left group. And there were some, and at that point I met Palestinians that had immigrated, and they know all about it. They didn't have to be activists per se. Some of them were Israeli Palestinians. Some were refugees or immigrated from other parts of Israel, that region, could be the West Bank and whatever. And so I started to get more information about that kind of world, and just increasingly, not crazy angry, but properly angry. Like, this sucks. And by the way, whether I signed up for this or not, I'm implicated, right? And that's true, but then the larger issue, and maybe we can address this a little later, is the US is implicated, the West is implicated. It's a first world, global North thing versus the rest of all the humans. And but I didn't get to that stage for a decade. I was still working this out. And so then I was working with these sometimes they're Arab left groups, but always with those groups, and they'd always build up a little bit and then they'd disappear. Yeah. Build up a little bit and disappear. I was in Norway, and their main Amnesty International thing was the death penalty in the U.S., but there was no Israel stuff. But I was working on that in terms of keeping an eye on it. And the Jewish Voice for Peace in 1996, there were 3 students, Julia, the 2 Julias, and Lincoln, who, as undergraduates at UC Berkeley, started Jewish Voice for Peace, this little group, because they were angry and concerned. At that point, Netanyahu was trying to go under Al-Quds, physically to do some architecture, archaeological, or some building thing. It caused a massive outcry from, people in East Jerusalem, West Bank, the world. And there's a lot of people killed. Not relatively, compared to 0, there were a lot of people killed that shouldn't have been. Because this is to the people that know the region, again, I don't know much about, the different feelings or the practices in Islam, but it was really an insult, a big insult, and an obvious attack, right? So that's why Jewish Voice for Peace started. Very small group. They would, very small. Obviously, there's like 3 or 4 or 5. Bruce just died. Anyway, I sound like an old man. And, but there was 3 or 4 people for a couple of years. Yeah. And then the second Intifada started, and more people started to come a little bit. And I was one of those people. It was my first Jewish group. And when I went to this huge meeting of 10 people, 11 people, the only question I had was, would you have someone that's not a Zionist? Because at that point I had taken that journey. I said, I'm not going to sign up for racism, And they said, yeah. But it was mostly, I would call them disappointed and/or liberal Zionists, or people that didn't know how to think about themselves, but they knew that they're Jewish and this kind of sucks. Yeah. But they were treating symptoms at the time. And so through the second Intifada, we started to get a little bigger. And then I pushed, there may be, sometimes, I don't know how big we were. Sometimes we'd have meetings of 10, 20, 30. Mostly it was 10 or 6. And we'd be around a table talking. And then, the second Intifada started, and I was thinking, man, why are we chasing symptoms? This settler hit that Palestinian, blah, 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 and there's endless symptoms. So this is really about us in the US as Americans who happen to be Jewish. This is our country, and in fact, we're giving, at that time, it was from Camp David, they were getting about $3 billion a year in grant aid. And the Egyptians were getting about 1.8, let's say 2. And so they were getting that from Camp David. And then we knew that. So we used that as a lever to sort of organize ourselves to have a petition against military funding to Israel. And that wasn't, it wasn't, even though we could have gotten 10 million people to sign it, it was a way to help advertise ourselves to people. And then we started to grow much larger through the second Intifada. And that's where we started to get it was all local, based around Bay Area, Berkeley, Oakland, and students and others, because there's a lot of lefties.
So you weren't like nationwide yet. You were
not
still
even close.
Quite, yeah.
That wasn't even a dream.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it was. Our aspiration was to fight AIPAC. That's, you have to have a mission, I guess. I mean, it's you have to shoot for this, whatever. Yeah. And so we were quite small, but still growing. Sometimes we'd have 30 to 60 people at a monthly meeting in the Jewish Community Center in Berkeley. Just saying. They didn't know who or what we were because we didn't, and this is our trick. And this is something, even though I'm a hard lefty, by the way, anti-Zionist wasn't used back then, even by Palestinian.
Right.
They just said not Zionists.
Yeah.
We're not Zionists, right? Yeah. And then there were Zionists. And now the term anti-racist is useful for understanding anti-Zionism. It's just a racism, essentially. And so I just wanted to let people know. So what we did in Jewish Voice for Peace at the time, we built ourselves, and early 2000, 2002, 2003. And then we got bigger. We incorporated as a nonprofit, and there's some great work done by lawyers putting in a lot of time. I really don't like that kind of work. I'm more of a writer and thinker and organizer-ish person. And they did great. Everyone threw in. What do I mean by that? Collaborated. We all did our little bit. We'd go out to protest with our little table and our Jewish Voice for Peace sign. Sometimes it'd fall off and we have to. And people would go, "What are you? Who are you?" And you can imagine the kind of people would come up. And I got very used to, much before that, people calling me, self-hating, not a Jew, a capo. Do you guys know what that is? The concentration camp Jews that helped the Germans.
Wow.
Or they were typically that's what they were using.
Yeah.
So they want to,
A traitor, basically. A traitor.
Absolutely. Yeah. But on the other hand, they're trying to live. I mean, they're all in a death camp.
Yeah.
They're going to be killed sooner or later anyways. Probably, right? So I don't want to go after individuals. You're in a hostage situation or a death situation, but yeah, effectively.
That's what they're implying.
That's implication.
Yeah.
And I don't know how many hundreds of times I've been called that, and rabbis at left synagogues would say that, and or they would say, "He just doesn't know. Let me tell you the history and the politics." And by that time, I had a second PhD, whether I wanted it or not, effectively in the Middle East history.
Right.
And so there was a lot of that. And then we went national through the 2005, 6 issue 7. There was a lot of hassle with that. And there was I went to Boston. I was in California, but I went to Boston to work. And then they had a Jewish Voice for Peace thing. Then I ended up in Detroit. They had a Jewish Voice for Peace, which makes sense. I mean, Dearborn and everything like that. So that's where we started to develop ourselves nationally, in different places in the South. I don't know all the details because I backed off from organization. But as we did, when I came back from ISM, I should talk about that because I was on the first.
What's ISM?
International Solidarity Movement.
Okay.
I'll talk about that in a second. But when I came back, I was on the first, board of directors for Jewish Voice for Peace, which I didn't like because you have to be there and deal with all this stuff, which I get. It's just me personally. It's like I don't like squash or something. It's just not my thing. And so ISM, that was 2002. International Solidarity Movement. It was kind of a movement, civil society movement called by Palestinians in the West Bank at Birzeit and in Bethlehem. It was a combination, a lot of, you would call them, not all, there's Islamic as well as Christian Palestinians that put a call out. And there was a kind of a first group that went in the summer of 2001, which was just before 9/11. And then we went in March, April of 2002 when the big deal invasion of the West Bank happened with Sharon, the prime minister at the time. And there was a huge amount there was bombings and buses and, in Israel proper, all cafes and all that, and of course, whatever's happening in the West Bank. So I was flying in with a couple of other volunteers as this started to happen. We were trying to do international solidarity movement was trying to do civil disobedience work with Israeli Jewish activists, or actually at that time it could have been Tayush, which is Israeli and Palestinian Israeli Jews and Israeli Palestinians working together, and they still exist. But we would be working with local people, Palestinians, going to protests, doing nonviolent resistance at crossings. You know, they would just show up anywhere, and just paint. You know, trying to record things. Again, before cell phones, so we had to, and I was taking pictures and all that. So we did that. There was a big war situation. There was a giant quarantine on West Bank, nothing in, nothing out. And a lot of our group was locked into the same hotel as all the world's press. So we made use of that. And then 6 of our people got shot at a demonstration. And that really got interest of the world press at the time. Yeah, it was live ammunition the Israeli soldiers fired in front of the marching.
Oh.
Right.
You know, and anyway, so that's that history. And then I'm going back to how we became national. And so we grew a bit, but not a lot was happening. Relatively, you know, Gaza was, you know, the whole Gaza thing with the election and the ghettoization of Gaza and all that. But not a lot. Well, not a lot. 2009, destruction in Gaza. 2014, the march, the Great March.
Yeah.
That was 2021-ish, 22?
I think it was in 2020, actually.
2020.
I think so. I'm not sure.
Wasn't it 2018?
I'm not sure. It seems...
Around
anyways,
2020.
You lose track, but that was a big deal because it was clearly completely nonviolent.
Right.
And they were just being shot. Doctors, nurses, kids, people in wheelchairs. Yeah. So... that was always keeping the pot boiling, so to speak, in terms of our organization. And I remember at the time, I was in Boston for 2009, about 1,500 Palestinians in Gaza were killed, more or less. And so there's a lot of protest around. There was a lot of organization per se, a lot of interest. Jewish Voice for Peace is kind of national, but not really growing. And then it's growing more and more. So till about 2019, we had about $3 million in, and this is just what they say, revenue every year. And so now it might be 10 times that much revenue because somehow we were in place, we still existed, and people came to, you know, we started organizing. I want to also say, this is very interesting about Zionism and non-Zionism or anti-Zionism. We purposely, even though I was a hard lefty, did not make a decision on whether we were going to be a Zionist or non-Zionist organization. It was very strategic because most people that were Jewish, and by the way, it wasn't just a Jewish group, anyone could join, but we wanted to make sure it was somehow Jewish identified. It was a very practical idea of saying we're Americans, we're Jews, and we don't, and against what a lot of these standard, you know, establishment Jewish Zionist organizations say, we are not, you know, we don't agree with that, right? Not in our name and that kind of thing. So anyway, a lot of people are coming out of the propaganda, trying to erase the brainwashing. And they might have been questioning, or we say, non-Zionist curious, or something, you know. And we wanted to provide a place. And so initially it was mostly Zionist people because that was our default. And by the way, Chomsky even said the best kind of representation of a real communist society was the kibbutz. It wasn't, you know, when he was really young, he was a Zionist, right?
Right.
at a certain level, that's kind of true, but they're also a fort typically on Palestinian, towns and such. I don't have to tell you guys that, but for purposes here.
Yeah.
Anyway, just to say, that was the environment we're coming out of. And so we could not have said, even though some hard lefty, real left anti-Zionist groups said we're not Zionists, but most people either didn't have an opinion or they were like, yeah, I'm a Zionist, of course. I'm breathing and I'm Jewish.
Right.
So to say to them, sorry, you have to be a non-Zionist at the time, we would have had the same 3 people or 5 people.
Exactly.
Right? And so it was very strategic. And we used to, the group Students for Justice in Palestine? Well, Nora Erekat and those people, they started the same early 2000s. She was a student, undergrad there. And we would try to do collaborative events or kind of support each other, right? But we would have a meeting, and I would be talking to Nora and a couple other people. Hey, they would say, "Well, you guys are Zionists, or we're not saying not Zionists. You're not saying what you are, and you need to be non-Zionist just because we're Palestinian. We're not Students for Justice in Palestine." And I totally get it. I said, yeah, hey, if I'm a member of your group,
Right.
but officially I'm representing a Jewish Voice for Peace here, and this is what we need to do now. And if you can't, kind of sign on to an event or something, totally get it. We're working towards hopefully the same thing, but we have a different kind of base at the time.
Yeah.
Okay, so that helped us get a lot of people. And by the way, people started to shift, coming out of their brainwashing from being a default Zionist to more or less being a non-Zionist.
Right.
And the composition of the group changed. I remember being attacked by some of the more liberal Zionist people in the group early on, and because I was kind of the hard left position, So, but those people mostly self-selected and left, or they changed but we still kept that position until 2019, and then formally we changed to anti-Zionist because that was the thing we wanted to do. But we finally had enough people, we had enough presence, and
So you started out not defining yourself as at all with being an anti-Zionist, and then now you're very clear on that you are anti-Zionist.
Yeah.
And hopefully along the way they can just don't say anti-Zionist and just be Jewish, because
You bring up a super important point, because there's this, you can imagine a table, or just, there are Jewish people, there are Zionists, there are, let's call them anti-Zionists now, right? And there are Christians. They're all theoretically, they're supposed to be separate.
Right.
Now, what happened is there is a mapping on of of Zionism and Judaism. And there is also the anti-Zionist Jew is a possibility, the anti-Zionist Christian, or let's say not Jewish. And then there's also the possibility of Christian Zionist. That's not a possibility, that's a real thing. And then there's
a very powerful thing as well.
And then you have, so you have those different groupings. They're not, and so that's what, now it's becoming clear to people that that's the case. Like, Jewishness is not, there's no essence of Jewishness in Zionism.
Exactly.
It's a cult that most Jews in Europe either ignored or they treat it with contempt, right? Or there's even Einstein, who Israel wanted him to be the first president. He just said, no, thanks. Ethno-national state, nah, you can't fool me. I'm not that stupid, And I'm giving very quick history. There's all sorts of details, but this is under the idea of people say it's complex. No, it's actually pretty simple. The details are complex, but they have nothing to do with the general argument, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, that's why we, in 2019, that's what happened. And now we were ready for people. And in 2019, we said anti-Zionist. And we had the hardest time really getting younger people back then. You know, we even tried, there was even a separate young person JVP that people were trying, right? But that's changed. This is powered by young people. Exactly. And that's changed a lot. Now young people are, and we can talk about that as another section where, who are the students, who are the young people now saying, no, I'm an anti-Zionist, I'm an anti-racist, right? And those people used to be, you know, the only people that cared about the Middle East really were Christian Zionists, Jewish Zionists, Muslim populations, right? More or less that. Seemed like this little issue over here. It never was, but that's how it was treated. So it didn't get a lot of attention for young people because it wasn't, I'm talking about general young people, students and everything like that. So that has changed. Now everyone knows.
Well, I think that we can see that in the Palestinian movement as well now, not only with Jewish Voice of Peace, for example, but, you know, we've grown up with our parents always taking us to demonstrations, and it's the average age group that always go to the same demonstration, meet the same people, and it's people that have, you know, are directly affected by the Nakba.
Right.
And now we suddenly see not only Palestinians in the... Obviously, there were a lot of activists in Norway as well, but there would be activists from the 80s that would still go and be that small group. But we've seen that huge change now that there are so many, like with the student encampments and the protests, you see all sorts of people, all different backgrounds, all ages, which has been...
And that's a big deal, because people are identifying this, you know, Gaza as the, for good or bad, the social justice problem of this time. Obviously there are others, but this is the most prominent, and there's a reason for that. The US and the global North are killing Gaza, and they're using Israel as a weapon. And it's a very easy connection to make, right? And now that the students are woken up, not woke, but really they're waking up, they're saying, wait a minute, it can be black, brown, white, whatever, any religion, and you're like, this really sucks. Or not just it really sucks, they're horrified. And they were horrified with October 7th. You know, it's a bad thing that happened, right? In terms of violence, you know, there's these outbreaks of violence, a symptom, obviously. And then this kind of response happened, and very quickly after like the first week, people are like, I was here then. And that's when I met the Palestine Committee. Lena and those people. I was literally through like the second part of October. And we were thinking, and I talked to Jonathan Shapiro about this too, how big is this going to be? Maybe 5,000? And they're like, oh God, maybe 10,000? And your heart sinks. And we were thinking, if that happens, if that crazy thing happens, this insanely crazy, unimaginable thing happens, the Middle East and maybe the world will continue to blow up. Right? You just thought, oh my God, because it's just so obvious. And in the Classic Company, they had these horrible photos of people that had been smashed in buildings and things. And that was like the second or third week of October. And you're just like, so that got people's attention, and the kids were amazing. They were. I mean, I call them kids. They're fully competent human beings. My son's 19, and he's been awesome. I mean, he has a complex family situation. We do. Anyway, everyone's talking about it. and more importantly, and even better than I think 1968, they really understand power and class and this idea of the global North. When you talk to I did a little teach-in at the Blindern encampment, and were you there? I don't know if you were there when
We've been there, yeah.
Okay, and they all knew that. Yeah. All the students, even though some of them didn't know about what was happening before October 7th. They had no idea. That wasn't an issue for them. They were lefties and they were questioning, and yet, yeah.
And also it's big movement because it shines a light on everything that's wrong with the world, right? With the propaganda, with the Western media, with the politics, with big corporation as well. So we get like all the angles in one conflict, and that's why, like you said on the panel discussion as well, like the kids are all right. They see it.
Yeah, and they see it as a structure.
Right.
Not just, there's this crazy guy Netanyahu, and he just likes, and his people they're just monsters.
Right.
No, it's a monster system. And we all know that at a certain, I'm a real lefty. I know that that's kind of idealistic in a certain way. I'm an anarchist, really. And I know that's ideologically, pretty extreme but my point is that there's a structure that is failing in the world, is capitalism, and we see it in the US. I mean, Norway, my gosh, I love being here. It's such a relaxing place. In the US, I don't know if you've been there recently, it's just, there's no words at this point. I mean, the politics, the consumer society, we call it precarity, which means so many people on the edge of being very poor, homeless, unhoused. There's a lot of people. So we live in fear always, except for the really wealthy people. To the wealthy people, everyone else is the help.
Right.
And the kids are getting that. I mean, and they didn't get that at 68. They were fighting the man, power in a general way, but except if you were a real lefty then, you didn't have this. But almost they're smart. They're not just, free Palestine or some other, which is important, but there's a context that they understand. Yeah. And that's spreading. And I sent a couple letters to I was so happy when this happened. The president of Columbia University started moving against the students, and it was the best thing that could have happened. And I sent her 2 letters thanking her. I don't think she's going to reply, but it was a very nice letter. I was being truthful. Yeah. I was very thankful, and then I just thought, this is going to spread because Columbia is one of the places it started, and now I don't. There's you look on social media and they add all the different universities and they're growing, and who knows how that's going to turn out. But in the U.S., it's interesting. Yeah. This is why it's interesting. It's a political force that does not have any connection to power. The normal, not power, but the dominant power. Yeah. Right. There's no way for dominant power to influence it except shutting down TikTok, trying to arrest them. But the cat's out of the bag. Yeah. And so that's and it's going to affect our elections. It's already, Go ahead.
Because we were talking earlier as well, in Norway, because we're also such a small country, we have more connection to our government, that we can talk to politicians and we can send them letters and actually sometimes get an answer. And
and you were in a meeting as well with the foreign minister.
Yeah. You were with the foreign minister.
Yeah, I was. And it was... but we have that, we always have... Because we're a small country and we have such a big movement now also, we are more likely to be heard or seen at least, and not necessarily heard. But I would imagine that would be because America is such a big country and there is such a big divide between the governments and the state and the people. Yes. It would be more difficult for you to actually
Yeah.
reach out.
Can I just add on a question to that as well?
Yeah.
Because you mentioned it, that AIPAC, your Jewish Voice for Peace was a part of a reaction to AIPAC, right?
And that whole system.
Right.
Yeah.
So how deeply rooted that is in the US as well in the politics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But also what AIPAC is, because it's an organization that basically funds Israel.
Yeah.
It's for all intents and purposes, it's a foreign agent.
Yeah.
And that's, I guess, legal if you declare yourself as such. They haven't. And also there's other groups like that, like the Anti-Defamation League, the Jewish version, not the Muslim or the Arab, they have different names, was originally against anti-Semitism and other kinds of racism, right? In a real way, early on. But it's changed to be the anti-Zionism equals anti-Semitism group, and they're unapologetic. So that is a huge force, and it's developed alongside the U.S. projecting power into the Middle East. That might not be the primary thing anymore, but it works with this growth of the Israel agents. And they've influenced every part of our society to the point, and I mentioned this earlier, and I need to say this, it's one of the things most important about understanding the US political structure. At this point, there is no political negative for being as right-wing on Israel as possible. You'd almost have to commit politician malpractice to say something that's not completely supportive of Israel. And there's a few people that do, Bernie and AOC, sure, but they don't really come out strongly. They're kind of, yeah, it's horrible and all these other things. So now, going back to the student movement, the political costs are actually, the switch just went from nothing to, it might decide in a presidential election in 3 or 4 weeks. And it was already before. When they had the primary in Michigan, they had 10 times more uncommitted than they were expecting. And they did like a 3 or 4 week or 5 week campaign to do it. And that was already a big warning, because Michigan lost. Biden won Michigan by 10,000 votes. And we say that's a battleground state. There are very few, because the US is a beta version of democracy. It's corrupted by genocide and slavery, right? And so we have this republic that's vaguely representational, but in every election, there's only a few key states that will decide things. Michigan's one of them, Wisconsin, I think. And there's others like Ohio and Pennsylvania and Florida. Those are typical. It used to be Nevada, but I think it's more blue now. Yeah, so that is the structure that people have to understand. Israel is effectively a 51st state because of all this. And more importantly, we talked a little bit about it, the massive economic trade and connections between the two countries. And I think I mentioned I was doing a little bit of research because I live in California. I said, I don't know what year it was, but I did a little bit of research and I found out that it was about, maybe let's call it 2020, I don't know, about $50 billion of trade between California and Israel. Okay.
That's
just the one state.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not just, it's one of the richest places on earth.
Yeah.
So it's fifth in terms of economies. It's about the 5th or 6th, right? And that's not a little. That's not a little. So you can imagine different. Israel is probably more economically related to the U.S. than Wyoming. Right. And so that's what we're dealing with.
Yeah.
But that could all change now. I don't know what's going to happen. Everything's been thrown up in the air. Yeah.
Were you mentioning anti-Zionism versus anti-Semitism? And there's recently been a bill that's been passed.
Yes.
by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, working definition of anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may express as hatred towards Jews. Basically saying that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism.
Right.
Is what it's making people it's making it more difficult to talk out against Zionism.
Yeah.
How do you think this can impact the solidarity movement in the US?
That's interesting. It's going to do two things. Initially, at the beginning, it's going to kind of dampen free speech a little bit, but also the response, it's going to piss off even more people. And we're ready for it because the whole country is now listening to this. And I can't tell you which way it's going to go. We've been doing these bills, and by state, there's a lot of these stupid bills. I mean, even in like Texas now, it's absurd. They literally have these anti-free speech laws, and they're being fought right now. And you probably know all there's countless kinds of examples of this kind of censorship occurring. And the worst I've seen, the most ironic and batshit crazy, was in Berlin, where a Jewish, I think her family had Holocaust survivors. She's a Jewish, German, Israeli, a combination. She's quite a lefty, 70-something years old, maybe older, saying anti-Zionist Jew or something like that in Berlin. The first time she was arrested, they apologized. And the second time, they made more of it. This is the law. We're just following orders. That's what they said to her, the police. So Germany, I mean, they're arresting a Jew for being anti-Semitic in Germany because she said, ceasefire, I'm an anti-Zionist or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know what the sign is. And versions of that at a lighter level are happening in the US, but that's the most extreme. Germany understands genocide in the worst possible ways. Yeah. They're very good at this. But the US, there's different versions of this as well. The difference in the US is that we like to sue people. And there's very powerful, relatively non-governmental groups that are already taking up cases, and they'll win them. It's easy. It's ridiculous. But the point of those things is to try and get those kinds of laws, is to try and shut people up. And it may, some, but I think there's going to be more. It's just like the anti-war movement in '68. It's growing, and people are pissed, just enraged. So when most people, not the mainstream media and politicians, see these weird anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism kind of links, they're like, what do you mean? My friend Rob, he's an anti-Zionist. Right. Seems okay. I don't know about that, but it seems to act normally, and there's a lot of that. And the students, they're like, nah, they don't. Right now, they completely don't trust national government, and they completely don't trust the mainstream media. Right. And it's their attitude is, yeah, no way. Not for like knee-jerk, we say, reasons, like because everyone says you shouldn't, because they understand the power structure. Yep. And I'm not sure what's going on in that regard now. I mean, it's like the national political structure's going this way. Yeah. Most of the people are going
the other way, right?
And I mean, just recently, I couldn't believe it because Biden, it's like he's doing everything he can to lose all young people's votes. It's almost like that's their campaign platform. He was at a historically black university that Martin Luther King came from to do this speech, and he repeated the lies about what the Hamas did when they attacked. All these stories about beheading babies and rape and all that, all just immediately proven to be just made up stories, right?
Yeah.
And he repeated them 7 months after in the way he can. He has this fixed face. He looks like your angry uncle who, wants you off his grass or something.
Yeah.
And it doesn't work. I mean, from that political optics point of view, he's not doing well. But he said this in front of the Morehouse graduation class. A lot of the teachers and students just either got up, had a little flag, or they turned around and put their fist up, things like that. And he just went on with these absolute crazy claims I want a ceasefire and all this. Well, of course, he says lots of stuff.
Yeah.
And the bombs still are shipped. So everyone sees this. This becomes news in the normal press, the mainstream press, even. So that's starting, it's just growing, and it's really going to heat up, because just like 1968, they're going to have the Democratic Convention in a very hot Chicago. Right. And if you know anything about the Chicago Convention, there was a lot of violence. The police, they call it a police riot. And I think this is going to be potentially even bigger.
Because we see now with the passing of the bill, the TikTok ban, the student movement. We also got the news today that the International Court of Justice are sending out an arrest warrant for Netanyahu. Are we seeing a system beginning to crumble?
Yes, that's a really good point. The U.S. is feeling the pressure. They started feeling that over a month ago when Chuck Schumer, the head of the majority leader for the Senate, pretty powerful position, he's very much a Zionist. He condemned Netanyahu by name, and he has to step down. Yeah. So I thought that was, I'm not going to judge what happened today yet, but the ICC is very much, I don't know if it's controlled, but influenced by the global north, US, in whatever way it wants to be. And for the ICC to go up against Netanyahu, again, I don't know. I'm really saying it, but one of the possible explanations is the US is, carrying out this policy of going after Netanyahu to take the eye off of, or the pressure off of, the actual genocide and the structure of that. Or, in fact, some other thing happened, and they're actually going after Netanyahu. But it does signal a collapse of the capacity to just say Israel first. I defend Israel. Israel has a right to defend itself, which are all, this is boom, boom, boom. That's always the talking points. And you hear that all the time with American politicians, the spokespeople, Anthony Blinken. Yes, it's horrible in Gaza. We really want it to stop. Everyone should want it to stop. But Israel has a right to defend itself. Next question, please. Or they walk away at that point. And that's just what they say. And that is very brittle now. It sounds crazy because they're defending the fuck out of Gaza.
We swear a lot here, don't worry.
Okay, I mean, it's like, and by the way, let's say Biden was right. Babies' heads were cut off, women were raped and murdered. Imagine the worst things humans can do. Well, you don't have to imagine, you just see Gaza.
Yeah.
Does that justify genocide? And it's like, the good thing is that Israel's filming their own war crimes so you don't have to. And we have, in the ICJ South Africa thing, they covered it perfectly. They said these are the announcements of the people running the government from the very top, and this is what the soldiers are doing. So they showed both eliminationist propaganda as well as the actual carrying out of that. And they prosecuted, in Rwanda, for example, a radio DJ for instigating. That was an actual war crime. Well, So that was obvious. And then there was the multiple insane acts of genocide, you name it. And we've seen it. And I don't want to go on social media or the news anymore because I don't know what kind of awful image. I saw one a day or two ago. I won't convey to you what it was, but I was like, is that? No. And I just got it I tried to get it out of my head because it's so monstrous. And then you imagine what people are living in. Well, you can't, it's
impossible. I've
been in war situations, but they were not great. People were dying and stuff, but I've worked in emergency rooms doing research and things like that. I've seen some really bad things come in. So yeah, it's that's why people are, because kids are all social media, whatever kind, TikTok, Instagram, whatever. So, the Twitter thing is useful for me because you get a lot of news from people. I have a curated feed of people that I trust that are reporters and commentators and things on it. So everyone's using social media in one way or another. And the kids, the younger people, I'm sorry, I don't want to say kids, but I think that that's keeping everything moving too. I don't know what's going to happen. The U.S., this is already a hell year. It's going to be far worse.
Yep. And
what we're going to end up with, I think this is not a hard prediction. Biden wins somehow. Complete chaos. The Trump supporters are going to be saying, no, fake election, blah, blah, blah. Guaranteed. If Trump wins, well, it's going to be big chaos anyways in the U.S. But from the point of view of internationally, what that election means, I'm not sure it'll be better or worse. And anyone that claims they know, Trump's a monster. I don't know. Genocide, you hit genocide, it's like hitting an infinity. It's like infinity plus one, infinity times infinity. Genocide's a low bar. You hit it. It's like, well, what could happen? Is Trump going to commit genocide? Kids don't want, we get it, people, but I don't know. We're in for a big internal thing. I don't know how it'll affect the rest of the world. My attitude is, don't vote worried about the US because we're 5% of the world's population, an important 5%, but because of the power and money. But the rest of the world, it's really about the rest of the world. What's better for the rest of the world. So.
Was it you that told us that in the synagogue in Norway, it was an Israeli and an American flag?
I think I talked about it. It wasn't in Norway, it's in the US.
It's in the US.
Almost every temple or synagogue, not all, have, well, why do they have an American flag? One, and then two, Israeli flag. And that just seems fine and normal.
Yeah.
You see that nowhere else. Nowhere else. If there was like a mosque, some specific mosque, and then there was let's say it's a Moroccan mosque. I'm just making this up, right? And they have a Moroccan flag out there, or let's say Egyptian or Lebanese or whatever. You can imagine it would cause people to say something probably. It's not that, but almost every Zionist temple or religious place, community center, typically has both. And,
that's so weird.
Yeah, it's really hard to understand that until you understand it.
Yeah, right.
And the reason I brought up, and we can talk about it at some point, but some of these issues politically in Norway, but one of those is the development of so far, there's not a lot of Jews in Norway, but there's a new development of Jews essentially aligned with something like a Jewish Voice for Peace. And I went to a meeting last week, and it was, it's like my memories went back to 25 years ago because the same kinds of things were coming in. Some people were very much anti-Zionist. Some people were 3 or 4 months ago, or 5 months ago, 7 months ago, kind of Zionist, but not caring, and they're coming out of it. So they don't really want to say they're not Zionists or anti-Zionists yet, but they're not saying, no, I won't be in this organization. They're open to trying to think through it. Again, from our position, we go, well, you could say, well, it's obvious, but if you're raised in this kind of setting, it doesn't matter how smart, wise, whatever you are as a child, this is something you're carrying with you and everyone around you. Yeah. And so that was it was a very interesting group of people, very interesting backgrounds. One person is effectively half Jewish and half Palestinian, right? He's an American, but you know, and yeah, there's a lot of very interesting stories in the room, and a lot of, and I wasn't trying to give them answers. I was just giving my sense of what we went through and things we dealt with, and very similar. Now it's different in regard to two things. People know far more about the issue and the U.S. role and Norway's role. And that's something we don't have to go too deeply in, but as people probably know who are listening, it, you know, both effectively, Norway is a vassal state of the U.S. It can't help but be. It has no choice in a certain way. Yep. But within that, there's also the weapons industry here and the oil fund, right? So Norway's implicated. It's not like, oh, those Americans, or it's over there, implicated.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of Western countries implicated. So it's not like it's not trying to just choose Norway. But it does give people here the responsibility, knowing this, to push against it.
Yep.
So when you hear a foreign minister or prime minister or the president of Blindern, whatever that's called, the person who runs it, say, well, you know, it's not our problem, right? And then, you know, well, yes, it's unambiguously a problem here in Norway. And a lot of people are waking up. Well, you can tell me, how do you think people, or they have the student thing, how are people, well, I'm here, kind of, you're talking to the foreign minister. I was talking to the Red Party people. I met with Maximus and the advisor to the Red Party, and we were talking about, you know, how to proceed, you know, how to think about these things. And so we don't have that access in the US. It would be like a different, you know, you go through a portal and you're in a different version of Earth, because it's
so far away.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, we don't. I don't know if we were recording it, but we don't have access. JVP now might be meeting privately, but not publicly with people like Bernie Sanders,
right,
or even AOC. She might come to the encampments, but to officially say I support Jewish Voice for Peace or something like, or I gladly meet with Jewish Voice for Peace or something like that. And going back to Jewish Voice for Peace, we're probably, I don't know, I'm making this up, 10 times the revenue of 2019, so that make it 30 plus million. The claim is we have 750,000 members or supporters now. Yeah. That's non-trivial. That's a lot of people. And it's just growing. And there's other groups like If Not Now, which is a young Jewish group. It's mostly for Jews on purpose, the same kind of reasoning we had before. And I just parenthetically want to say, I should not have to be Jewish. I shouldn't be a Jew standing up and saying, yeah, stop genocide. Yeah. It's just a human thing. And everyone talks about that. The fact that we still have to, I'm getting noticed, other people are getting noticed because we're Jewish, is what's the mapping on of Judaism with Israel/Zionism. And that's why we say not in our name. You know, we have our little t-shirt uniform, Jews, or ceasefire now or whatever. And it's having more of an effect. But that's what we're pushing back against constantly. And people in Norway, and the reason this is important if you're doing this for a Norwegian audience, the people in power will continue to say that it's, you know, Jews and Zionism. And even if there's a few Jews fortunately or unfortunately, saying, man, no, I'm Jewish, so what? I'm not going to support genocide. I mean, it's so obvious. I wouldn't support settler colonialism, but but this is so obvious.
But they don't really use Zionism in their language, I think, in the politicians.
Yeah.
I've never really heard them talk about
That's right, actually.
Zionism when I think about it.
No, they say Israel.
Yeah.
And it's because they're considered, it's the same.
It's the same thing, yeah.
But they don't realize that.
Yeah.
But that's what Israel wants. That's what AIPAC wants. That's what the U.S. wants.
Yeah.
And that's why when I've separated them out, because there's Christian Zionism, for example, there's far more Christian Zionists, at least 10 times more Christian Zionists than Jews in the U.S. They're much older than Zionism because they always thought the only way to get, Jesus Christ back is to have rebuild the temple, to have a Red Bull, not my Red Bull, but Red Cow or something, and all these crazy ass things. But there's far more Christian Zionists, and it's an older movement than Zionism. People don't know that, and they're out of control. So there's that political fact too. Again, that's what the students are pushing against, and we'll see.
I would recommend everyone watching Praying for Armageddon, which explains exactly the Zionist Christians and what their support to Israel, because it shows exactly what their aim is.
Yeah.
But I want to talk a little more about JVP because if your focus is on Palestinian liberation, and you've spoken a little bit about this now, why do you focus on organizing Jews, and why don't you just participate in Palestinian-led efforts?
Now it's both. Back then, we had to organize Jews. I mentioned that briefly before, because we would have had no one. And so we needed to say Jews marching. And if we could march with others, we weren't exclusive. We're not Israel. We want to work with groups, but we were trying to keep this specific identity. And we got a little bit of progress from that. Also, when I was we got a huge amount of press, Jewish people and others when we were doing international solidarity movement stuff. So it was one of the first times, I couldn't believe it. I would be on local news in San Francisco, apparently. I would call in, there wasn't phone stuff. And they would have me on for 5 minutes, talking like I am to you, without the cuss words. And I couldn't believe it. I'm talking about settler colonialism, that I'm Jewish, there's a Jewish voice for peace. Palestinians are getting hammered every single day, forever. And this is like a slave auction in the Mississippi in 1830, when you see it for yourself. So I said all that. And so that created more interest. And we were on international and national shows. And it was a little bit of a breakthrough then. But that was 20-something years ago. So, but that presence as a Jewish identified group was important to help us organize. Again, not Zionist, not anti-Zionist. And it turns out, even like around 2010, at that point, or even earlier, we were the biggest and oldest progressive Jewish group in U.S. history, right? It wasn't that big, and it wasn't that old. And that's just to give you a sense of how tenuous these kinds of things can be. And it could have disappeared anyways. Going national was very difficult. And then we got a really good executive director in, and it kind of stabilized things and allowed for a bigger organized professional structure, because we had paid staff, not a lot at the time, but now it's, God knows, it's sort of like when the American Civil Liberties Union, right after Trump was elected, and then anti-abortion things, they got huge amounts of money. And that's what's going on with the Jewish Voice for Peace right now. Again, with lots of young people.
Yeah.
And so, that's, does that answer the question a little? Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think so.
I can I'm like you push a button, right? And it's like, anyway.
We always ask everyone this question, which is, what is your favorite thing about Palestine or Palestinians?
Well, Zamud, right?
Sumud?
Zamud.
Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. The general, and I don't want to stereotype any peoples, but all Palestinians I came in contact with were unbelievably welcoming. And under the conditions, I was just astounded. And we all worked together really well. I would very easily say, I'm a Jew. And, and it didn't matter. Of course it didn't matter. All the propaganda, they're going to kill you. It's like, we have to deal with this. Anyway, the food. Come on, the food's really good. I love the food. When I could eat, when I wasn't like in a war situation or whatever, I really liked the food. Yeah. Just the street food, preparation and everything. And I can also say, they were, I saw them in myself. We're all Semites at a certain level. And the same kind of interest in education and those kinds of things. And that made me very sad, the demonization. But I've known Palestinians for many years before that, but seeing this, going there, even given my history and political knowledge, I was completely shocked. And yet people are living every day in these kinds of, and it's amazing to me. So my attitude is I'll do whatever I can to help. Both, two reasons. Because of Palestine, the suffering and the kind of the cultural sensibility that people have there, and the larger issue of the U.S., the power issue. So I don't have a choice now. I feel I've put so much time into this. And it's not, it's not easy. I'm not going to complain for anyone, but it's always been not easy there, at least since I've been alive. I was born in '59, so yeah. But here we are.
Yeah. We'll keep going until everyone's liberated.
Or to do what we can.
Yeah.
The whole idea is, for me, in a lot of the political work I've done, anti-death penalty, media, bias issues, I never assume the end point. I have an aspiration. You have to have a direction, but it's the journey. Even if you can't change the system, it's good to be able to not have the system change you, or you think maybe you don't even know, but to try and push back against that.
Yep.
And so I think of it as have an idea of what you think is important about human existence. And for me personally, it's doing good works, creativity, kindness, right? And those are really important.
Yeah.
And there's one other there, but those are enough. And so I try to align myself, oftentimes very imperfectly, but it's that aspiration. And so that's where I go with that.
I think that's beautiful. It is. Just like do your part, even if you don't see the liberation, but with your time on this planet, do your part to be on the right side of history.
Yeah, and it's hard. I mean, we say these things, do good works. Well, people have different definitions of that.
Yeah.
Be kind. Being kind is much harder when you don't feel kind. And so a certain moral courage, you have to keep on reminding yourself of that. And as a poet, I think creativity, I think for all humans is really important. And all people should have that. And in that respect, I saw that National Museum had a Sami textile artist. Go see it. It's incredibly good. And it's all about political things too.
Yeah, cool.
So art has its place.
Yeah.
It is.
Right? I really believe that.
Definitely. Rob, thank you so much for
Thank
speaking
you.
with us, and safe journey back to the US, and call us next time you're in Norway.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I definitely will be.
But thank you for all your good work. And
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank the whole group. It's been an honor to both be here and just work with people. And it seems like a privilege. I get to do this. I have this connection to Norway, and I have the Jewish Voice for Peace connection, weirdly. So, yes, I'm super happy to do anything I can.
Thank
the
you so
honor is
much.
on our side, so
For sure.
thank you.